Thank you all so much for coming today. As some of you have started, you can introduce yourselves in the chat. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to do some more formal introductions for myself and the facilitators. So this is module 3 of the Training as Action series, Trust Kids, Dismantling Hierarchy and Human Rights Advocacy. So I'm Cara, I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior at Albion College in Michigan, studying political science and English. I also have the opportunity to work as a research scholar with Human Rights Educators USA, and I'm helping to coordinate this year's Training as Action series. So I'm really happy to be here with you today. And now for the real stars of the show. So Emma, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. So hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening or whatever time it might be at, wherever you're joining. My name is Emma Tolliver. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently pursuing my JD at the University of Washington School of Law in Seattle, Washington. Before that, I was a youth worker in the California Central Valley, and I was previously an Edmonds Fellow with Human Rights Educators USA.
Thank you. Barbara, can you share now, please?
Yes, good evening, good day, wherever you are. It's so nice to be here with you. My name is Barbara McVeigh, and I use the she, her pronouns. I'm a filmmaker, film producer in California. Currently, I'm in El Salvador with a group of people working in a community for a few weeks, and really look forward to talking about children and human youth rights. Carry on the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we're getting started, if you want to continue introducing yourselves in the chat, and then also if you can put in how familiar you are with Carla Bergman's Trust Kids framework. It's okay if you're not familiar at all, or if you're super familiar, we're going to be talking about that today. And then also, what is one thing you hope to learn from this session? We'll have some time to hear from the facilitators and do some Q&A and discussion. So we'd love to hear if there's anything specific you'd like to know. So continue putting those in the chat. How today is generally going to go is we just had our welcome and check-in. We're going to briefly go over some group expectations and norms. Then going to cover what is ageism and adultism, go over the Trust Kids framework, look at promoting youth autonomy and intergenerational connection. And throughout that, we'll have some open Q&A and group discussions, and then we'll end with some evaluation and parting words. So as we get started here, we just want to make sure this is a respectful place. So we all want to be responsible and take charge of our own words and actions. We want to be empathetic and listening to what other people are having to say. We have a lot of different stories here that we're really grateful that we have so many different people on. We want to make sure we're sharing airtime so we can hear from everyone and everyone has an opportunity to share their story. But we also want to make sure there is participation. So limit somewhat what you're speaking, but still talk. We do want to hear from you. And we want to build kind of a cooperative environment here. We'd love if you can bring some of your energy and optimism and creativity to this space. We encourage communication and using our words clearly and positively in that respectful manner. We understand sometimes it takes courage and might have challenging questions to ask and want other people's input on. And we hope to build a space of trust where we commit to being honest and sharing our feelings and emotions. So thank you. Now, Emma, if you want to continue.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll just kick us off with a couple definitions of what is ageism and adultism as we're talking about, making sure that we avoid hierarchy in youth organizing and human rights education. I think just establishing these definitions would be super helpful for us. So first of all, according to the World Health Organization, ageism refers to the stereotypes, prejudice, marginalization, and discrimination towards others or oneself based on age. And then adultism is a slightly different term that was defined by psychologist and youth advocate John Bell in the 60s as a systemic bias that favors adults over young people and silences youth voices, even in matters that directly affect youth. So adultism differs from ageism in that it's a term that highlights how adults in societal and institutional structures can unintentionally or even intentionally limit young people's contributions, growth, and thriving. So adultism can often open the door to other forms of marginalization because it reduces young people's ability to see themselves as active and valued members of society. And that matters in human rights education because if young people feel silenced and marginalized in their education, they can't learn. So it's really a responsibility for adults in this work and in this particular field to create and co-create educational environments where young people feel safe to lead, to question, to explore, to criticize, and to innovate. Youth are not just vessels to receive and regurgitate information passively. We have to encourage dialogue, respect their perspectives, and foster a collaborative approach to understanding. I kind of want to talk through this idea a little bit more and reflect on what these terms mean and how they impact us. So here's a couple of questions about your personal experience with ageism and adultism. If you feel comfortable and compelled to answer, would really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and reflections with the group. And you can answer both questions, you can answer only one of them. Really, it's up to you to share what you're comfortable with. So the questions we have here are, oh.
Sorry, it is going to be put in the chat in 1 second. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
perfect. So Carl will be putting those in the chat, but it's what aspects of, ageism and adultism play sort of in your life. I'll just wait for those to appear in the chat.
It's loading right now. Let me try this one more time. Sorry for the delay.
You're good. So yeah, the first set of questions was what aspects of my age may grant me privilege in society, and what are some of the challenges faced by people who have less privilege in this area than I do? And yeah, Cara, just put them in the chat. If you want to come off mute, feel free to, or if you want to put your answers in the chat, please go ahead. We really would love to hear sort of your perspective and if you had even heard of the term adultism before this. Thanks for sharing that, Danielle. Yeah, that you tend to be trusted by youth and that adults show you respect without question or relationship building, really. Yeah. Uh, yeah, we have a hand. Do you want to go ahead and share?
Hi, yes. My name's Mireya. Nice to see you all. I feel like coming from my background, like as a Hispanic, Latino community, that a lot of times, even now I'm 24 and still I like when I sit at the adults table, you don't talk, you don't chime in because it's seen as disrespectful. So I feel like sometimes with age, you get more respect to be able to converse with the adults. And as I've gotten older, I have gotten more respect, I guess, and be able to share my opinions more often.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think that a lot of people would relate to that, and I really appreciate the way you framed that and talked about how your cultural experiences shaped and intersected with ageism. I also see in the chat people are mentioning the right to vote. That's definitely something there, and other issues that impact youth. We have a couple other questions. I think we're just we might be ready to move on from those questions. I think Carl will be putting them in the chat, but yeah, if people have thoughts on these next set of questions, which is, you know, again, these are just sort of preliminary reflections. We're going to get into this more, especially with the Trust Kids framework, but just sort of at the surface level of just talking about ageism and adultism. What sort of things do you think you can do to challenge the systems of inequality regarding ageism? And how are you listening to the voices of people who are marginalized and being supportive in their struggles for justice? And then how do you feel when your privilege about ageism or adultism is pointed out or questioned? As well as how you respond to that. And yeah, Kara just put those in the chat.
Well, I feel like, again, like going back to what I previously said, what I do is I make sure that at least my space is open for kids or, teenagers to share their opinions. Because even though I am older than them, I feel like they have a voice and things like that. And, just giving that safe space, and then when having their input in activities that we do, or just letting them voice those opinions, I feel like is something that I put my part in.
Yeah, that's great. That's great allyship and, creating safe spaces for youth. Really love to see that. Um, yeah. If anyone else has anything they want to share, I just saw someone come off mute. Yeah.
Well, I think that that's an excellent point, that sometimes there isn't a lot that we can do because we have legal restrictions, we have ethical restrictions, because we do have to maintain a barrier between ourselves and the students, because we can't be their friend, but we can listen and say, okay, what do you think? Tell me. Tell me what you feel. Tell me what you think. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to punish you. I'm just going to listen. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to listen to what you have to say. As long as you don't start yelling and screaming, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to what you have to say. And I think that that goes a long way to helping people feel like you're not just pushing them aside. Well, you're a kid, you don't know what you're talking about, so just, you know nothing because you're 14. What do you know? And I think that that really does go a long way to just having an ear. And they are going to point out, well, you could do something about it. Well, what do you think I could do about it? Tell me again. Tell me what you think I could do.
Something that I think is really important is I kind of already touched on it a bit, but trying to lean on and utilize or expand students' critical thinking skills. So problem solving, being solutions oriented. I think it's quite easy. Well, and we get used to this as adults, but to identify the issue. But the harder part is to come up with an idea as to, like, as a community, how can we, or even individually, start to address this? And so helping expose them to the different ways that both adults and youth who are not of voting age are able to do so. And ways that I like to do that is not only offering them very like pointed examples, working with 7th and 8th graders. I have them go and find out who their congressperson is or their Senate member is, maybe like their local city council members are, and decide based on my issue, who would I like to address this to? Or do we think that even asking a politician is the best way to go? Or would I like to make flyers and put that out in my community? How can I best get my message across, and really helping them explore the different options so that they know it doesn't just come down to voting. It comes to advocacy, really, and relationship building within your community. And that's something that no matter what age you are, you can always do. And then I think that as a teacher, it's really important to me to always call on call out my privilege. Because rather, my privilege is called on many times in my life and society. I'm an affluent, middle-aged white person, and I think that, I mean, obviously, with that comes many privileges, whether asked for or not. And so to openly speak about that, but not in a way of guilt, but in a way of acknowledgement, I think is really important, because it's okay for us to acknowledge where we're at in spaces so that we can then understand maybe the opportunities that we have to help uplift other communities and people, I think is really important. And so when I'm called out on those, I think that, I mean, I have to be transparent. It makes you, because I feel like I try to be quite aware of my privilege, but maybe that, you know, there's definitely times that that doesn't happen. And so when it happens, the last thing I can do is be disappointed or defensive or hurt by that. And I need to be open and understanding and include those voices in my experience, because to model that to other people, let alone children, is the most important piece. To be able to have civic discourse, I think, is what I am really, really hoping we can engage young people in.
Thank you both so much for what you shared. Those are really valuable insights, and I see in the chat people are saying, like, love what you're saying. And those are really great examples, and we'll actually get into like problem solving and mutual respect in relationships as like key parts of the Trust Kids like framework. So you guys are already hitting it right there with what you guys were sharing. Yeah, thank you so much for just opening up and, you know, sharing your insights with the group. I think at this
Yeah, I have
point,
a question.
yeah.
Yeah, my question, like, for example, for people with disabilities, how do we respond to them when their rights are abused? How do we help them in situations when they cannot help themselves? Do we give them opportunities to vote as other youth do? These are some questions in my mind. I feel I should share with you.
Yeah.
Because usually persons with disabilities are usually ignored. And anytime they try to make their voice heard, they are usually shut down. So how do we help them? I think these questions fitting into what we are talking about, right?
Yeah, are you thinking specifically about like youth with disabilities?
Yeah.
Yeah. So similar to how you'd work with other youth, you want to, you know, empower them to, you know, be able to, you know, make decisions. In a lot of ways, you know, especially like youth with disabilities might be treated like in sort of a paternalistic view, with sort of this idea that like adults are superior and kind of in an infantilizing way. So it's really important to make sure that you know, youth with disabilities in particular, because of that intersection of them being both a youth and disabled, feel that they're like there's a shared power relationship there. And we'll get into more things with the Trust Kids framework that'll sort of talk about ways of serving youth at large that I think could be applied to you know, youth with disabilities. Um, is that helpful? I think we'll talk about it more throughout the presentation.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cara, I think we're ready to go back to the framework.
All right.
Perfect. So now we're really going to get into what the Trust Kids framework from Carla Bergman and Danny Burleson is. So Trust Kids, Stories on Youth Autonomy and Confronting Adult Supremacy is a series of essays, poems, and other work that focuses on the importance of trusting young people and empowering them to take control over their lives and their decisions. So the book is a collection of stories and reflections that sort of challenge traditional and hierarchical ideas about adults' role in shaping and controlling youth. And I just want to read this quote by Eli Meyerhoff describing the book, in which Meyerhoff says, "Recognizing that we reproduce the seeds of hierarchy in our everyday relationships, this book not only offers guidance for youth liberation and intergenerational justice, but also prefigures an alternative to adult supremacy." Drawing on and interweaving voices across generations, centering young folks' perspectives and wisdom, the authors present a diversity of creative approaches to how adults can learn to trust kids more deeply and immediately co-create our futures together. So yeah, I just want to leave you all with that quote as we get into the central themes of the book. And the central themes are trusting children and teens, youth resistance, non-hierarchical relationships, radical youth futures, and resilience through autonomy. And we'll be exploring all these topics in depth, starting with trusting children and teens. In terms of trusting children and teens, Bergman emphasizes the need to trust kids and their ability to critically think, make decisions, and learn from their experiences, which I think Danielle talked about like really beautifully earlier when we were having our discussion about sort of how we can use privilege. Instead of viewing children as sort of passive recipients of adult knowledge, Bergman really encourages adults to see them as active agents in their own development. With the central argument being that young people are capable of making informed decisions and shaping their own lives if they're given the trust and freedom to do so. Often society treats children as inferior or incapable, assuming that they lack wisdom or judgment to make decisions for themselves. And it's really, there's an onus on us to reject this view and instead advocate for a shift of seeing youth as individuals with their own agency, wisdom, and potential. By trusting youth to navigate their own challenges and make mistakes, we allow them to build confidence and critical thinking skills. And this trust cultivates a sense of responsibility and self-worth, encouraging young people to engage in the world in a more meaningful way. In trusting kids and teens, we really want to challenge this paternalistic view, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of traditional view of adults as like superior guides for youth that often leads to the infantilizing of young people. Adults should trust kids as partners in a shared process of learning and growing. The next major theme that Bergman talks about is youth resistance, and the book highlights how young people who resist authority and societal norms can find that to be a form of empowerment. And the stories that are included illustrate how youth push back against oppressive systems, sometimes in schools, sometimes in family structures, sometimes in cultural expectations, to create their own ways of navigating the world. And one of the key ways youth demonstrate their autonomy is through resistance to imposed authority, which can take many different forms, not necessarily all that are like disruptive or, you know, that we wouldn't want to see from youth, including just questioning rules and like rejecting conventional expectations or forming alternative spaces where they can create their own rules. Some youth might seek out alternative learning environments that allow for more freedom, creativity, and individual exploration. And resistance can be a form of empowerment. Instead of viewing resistance solely as, rebellion or defiance, it can be empowering for young people. When they resist oppressive systems, they're asserting their autonomy and advocating for a future where they have more control over their lives. And Bergman really highlights that this is an important aspect of youth power. She also talks a lot about non-hierarchical relationships, advocating for relationships between adults and youth that are not based on dominance and control, but mutual respect, collaboration, and trust. And this approach seeks to dismantle sort of like the paternalistic structures I talked about, which typically limit young people's autonomy. The traditional sort of adult-child relationship is that adults give orders and children obey, but this power dynamic just limits the ability of young people. It's better to view that a relationship in which both adults and youth are seen as equals, with each having vulnerable perspectives to offer. Adults are not authoritarian figures, but rather co-learners who can listen and support young people. This creates collaborative approaches to problem solving with rather than dictating rules, adults can work with youth to co-create solutions that are meaningful to them. One of the examples of this could be educators encouraging young people to pursue their interests and passions while giving guidance and mentorship. And while I was working on this PowerPoint, I actually reflected on one of my own educational experiences where instead of having to do an assignment in a certain way, I talked to a professor about whether I could do an assignment in a comic style. And that was really, beneficial for me. I felt that I learned the material better by being able to use my artistic skills in this way, and was able to do really well in the course, having that adjustment and accommodation made for me. I was still, doing work and I was still learning the material, but I was able to do it in a way that was particularly like meaningful and impactful for me. And I think that's just really helpful. One of the, one example of showing how youth can co-create solutions and engage in these non-hierarchical relationships. Bergman also talks a lot about radical youth futures and how empowerment of youth now allows them to contribute to creating a more equitable and just world that respects human rights. By empowering children and teens to think critically and act with agency, they can contribute to creating more just and inclusive societies. Youth who are encouraged to think outside the box and challenge dominant power structures now are going to be more likely to work towards social change that benefits everyone. And I feel like we always hear that, like, Gen Z or young people are going to save the world, but they need practice to be able to do that. They can't just, grow up and then be expected to, change those dominant power structures. They need to, develop the skills to be able to do that. So youth as agents of change can create radically different worlds based on trust, cooperation, justice, and human rights. Youth aren't just like the inheritors of society's problems, but they're, actually agents of change that understand that, different futures are possible. And Bergman really highlights this idea. And then finally, Bergman talks about resilience through autonomy, this idea that youth can demonstrate resilience by carving out their own paths and learning through direct experience and self-determination. Traditional like education kind of emphasize obedience and conformity, which can stifle creativity and critical thinking. But when youth are trusted to, make decisions and take risks, they develop resilience by learning from their own experiences, successes, and mistakes. Yes, mistakes. Failure is not something to be avoided, but it's an essential part of growth. And youth who are given autonomy and are more likely to experience setbacks are able to take these challenges as valuable learning experiences that build resilience. So by trusting kids to take risks, adults help them develop emotional and intellectual tools to navigate difficult situations in the future. Self-determination is so important in fostering resilience. When young people are empowered to make choices about their own lives, they develop the skills necessary to adapt to change. And that is sort of the crux of this resilience through autonomy idea. So just to conclude, Bergman's Trust Kids urges adults to sort of rethink their approach to youth empowerment by advocating for the shift away from a hierarchical relationship to a more collaborative and respectful engagement cross-generationally. Really, there's just a transformative power of trusting young people and allowing them to take charge of their futures. And through resilience, resistance, and autonomy, youth can reshape their own lives and contribute to a more just, equitable society that honors human rights. I just want to leave this quote that is included in the book. Imagine a world where every relationship we had was reciprocal and consent-based instead of extractive, where trust and responsibility were the foundation. What kind of community would we have? And if anyone has any reflections that they want to share at this time, sort of on the framework or on this specific quote, please feel free to unmute and share with the group. And I'll just put the quote in chat. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Sorry. No, yeah. So I like something that I reflected on during like learning about this framework and everything is that is kind of me being like an aunt now and having the younger future generation of our family. I really do try to make sure that to if they're wanting to debate, not debate something, but have a conversation about something, like just to give them a couple minutes, because sometimes it's hard to process your thoughts and feelings. And so sometimes they just have to take a moment and pause and collect themselves. And I really do try to give them that space. Or when they're feeling really big emotions, because my nephews are 10 and 9 or 10 and 8, and so sometimes they just have really big emotions that they just can't express quite yet, especially when they were younger, and they just like start crying, and then I'm like, okay, let's breathe and then try to work through what you're feeling, why are you feeling like this, and how can we make it better. And I feel like a lot of times, like especially in like the grocery store, when they start crying, you don't like, you just want to get out of there. And I get my nephews for like 2 weeks in the summer. Well, their parents go on vacation, and 2 weeks of kids is a long time for me. Really props to the parents in the chat. But I feel like that's what's really taught me, is just to have patience and let them come to their own conclusions. And you know, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like a great relationship dynamic that you have there that really, respects the young people in your life. Um, I also saw this comment in the chat about, navigating relationship with your 12-year-old with strong opinions and challenges. Yeah, I hope this was helpful as you sort of like navigate this period of your life. That's a really amazing comment. Yeah, I'm just gonna repeat that. I'm so excited for him to walk into his teen years and into his adult years as a confident advocate for himself and his peers. And that's really, so foundational in like this framework, is that we want young people to feel empowered and have autonomy over themselves. Because that's how we have, young people who care about human rights and can make, positive changes in the world about human rights. Thanks so much for that. So I have a couple of questions just on reflection. I think Kara's gonna put those in the chat, but yeah, if anyone wants to sort of take a stab at these, just sort of, reflecting on the Trust Kids framework, how do you take the learnings about youth autonomy right now and then put them into your practice, whether that be as a teacher or whether as a youth worker? How can you think about implementing this? What are some ways you can ensure that youth feel seen, heard, and empowered in human rights spaces? And how can we bridge intergenerational gaps to build cross-generational solidarity and community?
I want to think of in a classroom where you have children learning, and sometimes you find a child not really wanting to go with the others, the children who like to be independent and doing whatever he likes in the class, apart from what is being taught. You, as a teacher, should give that child the respect and allow him or her to have that independence in the classroom. What about that? We call it academic freedom, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to support youth in their independent interests and, think about ways to support them in exploring those interests and having autonomy over those interests. Um, and maybe there's a way to sort of bridge, curriculum or what the main group is doing um, with that independent interest. So that way sort of bring that youth in. And you can co-create that solution with that youth and sort of, talk to them and figure out why, maybe they aren't interested or maybe why they're interested in this thing and see how to bring it to the larger group.
With respects to bridging the generational gap, I think it's important for us adults, number one, to be respectful of the of the kids as they speak on the creating safe spaces for them to feel comfortable to address and to speak freely. And then by us being genuine, be not being fake, be sincere on our approach, because they can read that. And that is an effective way to bridge the generational gap.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's very true. Like, youth are intelligent. They can tell when you're being sincere or not. So just being really intentional in how you want to, build solidarity and build connection with them and like really actively empower them. I also love what Jen said about making sure that youth are not interrupted, because youth have important things to say, and by giving attention to that, making sure that they're able to say it, I think is so important. Yeah, I'll give a hand.
Sorry, I keep on talking. But I just was thinking and like trying to think about these questions, really reflecting. And I was thinking of how my mom would she would listen to us and like she took our interests, even though we were all different. Like my sister likes to cook, one was athletic, I was passionate about criminal justice. At 14 years old, she was letting me join criminal justice clubs and doing training and stuff like that. My sister was on soccer teams for 12 years. My sister was in home ec all the time. And I feel like she gave us that space to really grow in our individual interests. And I feel like I'm seeing that now in my sister's kids, where one is about to do, he's in the rodeo now. He's doing junior rodeo. And we were thinking like, oh my gosh, what is he thinking? But she gave him that space to try it out. And now he's won trophies and gone on his little way. And the other one, he's like so into music, and she tries to get him any instrument that he just wants to try out. She rents it and gets it for him. And I feel like that's in itself is showing how my mom affected us, and then we're affecting our future generations. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, for sharing your insights with all the questions. I don't want you to apologize for taking up space. It's been really valuable and like helpful for the group. So yeah, I just want to, raise that and appreciate what you've been sharing so far.
Emma, I really loved your example, your personal example of advocating for yourself and going to a professor and saying, hey, look, I understand what the set assignment is. Here's how I like to show my learning. Is it okay if I do that? And I think that, so I work in a GT magnet school, a gifted and talented school. Regardless of that, in our curriculum or an expectation of us as teachers is to allow student choice. But I think that sometimes students get a little nervous about that. And they're like, oh, I have the instructions. I'm just going to do what the teacher asked. And to have that empowering conversation with a student like you, who is like, look, I like to learn this way. This is how I would like to show my thinking. I think that what I, as an instructor, would like to do in order to build both trust and responsibility within that student is to say, hey, I trust you to go with this route, but now let's have a conversation. How are you going to make sure that with this other choice option, you are still hitting this, like these rubric markers or the expectations? Now let's have a conversation about what that is specifically going to look like. And I think that really helps them think it through. It's not just like, oh, I would rather make comics. Okay, so do you think that it would be appropriate to create an outline for your comic story to ensure that you are hitting the markers that we need to be telling in this particular piece? And I also think another big thing with trust, and I would wonder what the rest of us think about this, is I think that there are some kind of like expectations of spaces, whether it be in school or just societal expectations, social expectations, that it's okay that we not only provide those and advocate for those with our students, but also demand those, because at the end of the day, that's helping them understand, like, Okay, so there's this expectation of me, and if everybody is held to that expectation, that actually help builds trust because they trust you as a societal member, as an adult, without being ageist. Everyone is being treated the same. I am expected to treat others with kindness. I'm expected to ask for materials before grabbing them. And those are just things that will help them feel safer in that space and less marginalized because there shouldn't be a different set of expectations for different students. And so I think that it's really empowering to allow youth to co-create the expectations of that classroom or space, but then it helps build trust when the adult or facilitator in the room, although we are ideally co-facilitators, are holding people to those expectations and to that line because like you said, failure is okay, a mistake is okay, but we can all learn from that. And so to not shy away from reminding a student what the expectation is and holding those high expectations because it's all out of love and reminding them that I am hoping to see this. What can I do to help you achieve this so that we can all be meeting these expectations can be really, really impactful and help those interpersonal skills for our students and ensure that there's like a mutual trust and responsibility throughout the classroom, regardless of how a person is wanting to tackle an idea or, you know, like express an idea. I think that can be really helpful.
Danielle, I feel like we should have you up here facilitating. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And, really like, I feel like synthesizing, the Trust Kids framework. That was great. Have you read Trust Kids before?
No, but I've just realized what works in the classroom, demanding things of people. I'm 34 and I don't like to be demanded of things. Like I don't like that. I like to have a conversation about that. So I want to treat young people the way I want to be treated. So thanks for saying that though. You really made my day. I just subbed for a bunch of first graders. So like that's very uplifting. It was tough today.
Well, I'm glad I could do that. If there's no other sort of comments on this point, I will turn it over to my co-host, Barbara, and we're going to talk about some ways to sort of think about how to cross these intergenerational gaps and how to sort of ways of implementing the Trust Kids framework, because we don't want to just give you a framework and say like, okay, go implement it. We want to sort of give you some ways to think about how implementation might actually look in some particular areas.
Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'm really happy to be here. And before I read this quote, I just wanted to reflect on the day that I had here in El Salvador, where I arrived yesterday to join a community of people to build a house. And it was such a remarkable day that really flows into the conversation that we're having, because there was so much collaboration with multiple ages, generations, from young children, 7 to 9, joining us and finding rocks to build with, or one baby was being passed from arm to arm while people took a rest while we built this cob house from natural material up high in the mountains. We're very high in the mountains close to the border of Guatemala. And it was such a joyful day, And I think we all came away from this day today of like how well we all work together. There was one person in charge, but he was not authoritarian. It was more of a collaboration, like, oh, you're building this bench right here. What kind of shape do you think it's starting to look like? How would you like to do it? So we all had some participation in its outcome. Well, the young children were right by us, and we also had a 15-year-old teenager who's homeschooled. She came from the States with her father. And she was just right in there building with glass bottles. The structure is meant to be sustainable, naturally made from nature, sustainable. And it was such a healthy day and joyful. And I think that was what I really came away from today, with the idea of interconnectivity, intergenerational healing, bonding. Is that something that we can all get in tune with? And that is joy. And I honestly not sure if we have enough joy in all of our lives. I challenge that. So I came down here probably as a result of my 8th grade Spanish teacher, who had the idea of students by bus from Northern California into Northern Mexico. This was many years ago. And she took us into places that might have not been conventional. She looked at us and thought, let's go visit a discotheque. Let's go into the villages and see the customs and the culture. And what it did, and it's not so much about place, but it just made the sense of wonder for us all, and with her too. She was an amazing teacher, and she really gave me the lifetime gift of connecting with Latin America. And I've done multiple projects down here and love the communities down here. I think there's a lot that we could take away from here that I think sometimes we need to get back to in the United States, at least. And I know some people are here from other countries. But one of those elements, as we were working with today, is nature. And finding those places that are grounding for us all as children who are discovering and learning, but also as us as adults, we are continuing to learn. And some of us adults perhaps could learn more, because nature education we've lost a lot of that. And I reflect on Richard Louv. Many of you have probably heard of him and know his books. And No Child Left Behind, Last Child in the Woods was one of his books. And I bring him up because I feel there's a tendency in our culture to always look to the next best thing that's coming along, like the next book or the next film, and without maybe coming back to those works that really ground us and that could really become more of our core. And so I always go back to Richard Louv because I think he spoke to this overall generation where we're at. And he's at richardlouv.com, as I have here on the note here. By taking a lead role in the international movement to connect children, families, and communities to the natural world, we're striving to reinforce the critical link between researchers and individuals, educators and organizations dedicated to the health and well-being of children, families, and communities. So I've been able to see this firsthand. I'm a film producer. I've done projects mostly about artists. And I was also a nature educator for many years. I got to take kids out into the forest all day long, rain or shine, and connect with them. And what I always found was that the parent, in this case, and also other teachers, always wanted in, right? They always wanted to be part of that somehow because they were rediscovering their own childhood, maybe things that they had forgotten or that they had missed out on. And it's such a grounding force of discovery and wonder. And it's magic, what we all have around us. And this is important because more and more our children are and I'll go into this in just a moment without giving it away, but they are being very distracted with a lot of external voices. So as much as we try to be there for these youth and try to connect, they're also being pulled away. So maybe we go to the next slide. Let's see what I have here. Thank you very much, Cara, for doing that. Yeah, Last Child in the Woods. What's his last book? It's a good recommendation for all of us, for adults and for children, youth. Time in nature is not leisure time. It's an essential investment in our children's health, and also, by the way, in our own. And it's a place where you can go without even talking, right? It's a place where you can really be together in the quiet. You don't always have to use words. Simple, just exploring, seeing things and opening their eyes and opening your own eyes. And the children, I will say as a teacher, taught me constantly. They would see things that I wouldn't see. They would find things that that opened up new conversations, or I would find something and they would get excited. So it created an equilibrium, place where we could knit, but without the authoritarianism. And you could probably bring that to the table, but you don't need to. And I can say that it was a magical time. And I think this is important in our time right now more than ever, especially after the pandemic, when people were, very closed in. It's a lot of screen time, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But it's a reminder for us in our own communities. And I think somebody had said it. I wrote it down. Our relationships. Let's see. I think Jen, you had said something about honoring our communities and really coming kind of a reconnection with our communities. And how do we build those opportunities? Because we are the creators, even as educators in the classroom. We can create those opportunities, or we can find those opportunities to help steer the youth. And I know for my own children, and this is anecdotal, of course, too, but as a parent, and then also as an educator, but as a parent, those were the places where we could go to be quiet. Nobody even needed to talk about the day or to talk about maybe something that happened the day before that was uncomfortable, but it was kind of a renewal. And I firmly believe this is a child's right to know their world. And, most children, sadly, as adults too, probably couldn't even name the tree outside the window. And I've seen this. Or don't know the edibles that you can find in nature. And that's a joy, right? Simplicity, bringing it back down to the simple. I think we oftentimes in society need the complex. Maybe not, but we're always looking for the answers, and I think the answers are right here for us in so many ways. And it's just scaling it back, simplifying, and getting into what's more real now. And I reflect on the house building today. There was a big pile of dirt where the kids were playing. We had our shovels and mixing mud and clay and building with glass bottles, all natural materials that were found in the area. And the kids were very much a part of that, right? And I think about their level of autonomy, what they're learning about themselves in that space. As collaborators, we were all collaborators, learning as they were there with us. And how they were also, by a community of us, not just by one person, but by a community, were being reinforced with what they were doing. Some of the children had little blocks of wood that had been, let's say, not needed for this house we were building. So they had a pile of blocks and they were playing with it. And one by one, the adults, so as a community, we were enforcing this within them. Like, wow, that's amazing. What are you building? What are you doing? Or they would come over and slap some mud, so that's basically what it was, onto something that we were doing. It was very forgiving in that space. And I just looked at these youth And I just thought, wow, you know, this is such an amazing, empowering time for them. You know, and we were in a very small space. It was pouring rain. There was mud everywhere. It was great. And it was joyful, right? And satisfying because we were co-creating. Not telling the children to go over there and play, don't do this, don't do that. It was none of that. It was just like, oh, that's interesting. It was just a beautiful example. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I feel this was a big conversation a few years ago, and then it kind of subsides. And I want to bring it back into the framework because a lot of what Emma was talking about, you know, that autonomy and you know, mental, you know, empowered. To remember that as educators and teachers, we don't have, excuse me, and parents, it's not just our voice in their spectrum. And I got into this work a number of years ago when I was challenged with my own son when he was young. And I'll read this quote here. US advertisers spent just 7.5 billion on game ads last year. eMarketer expects US ad to spend $8.5 billion this year, hitting nearly 12 billion in 2027. And I think this is such an important topic, more now than ever before, because we know how much advertising impacts our youth. They wouldn't be doing this unless they knew how much it impacts our youth. So I ask, I hope for this to be a discussion because I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. How do we balance this, right? As parents, I know my voice was very small compared to all the apparatus that was out there, feeling at the same time that my youth, my own child, his childhood was being robbed, and he was being so influenced by these others who were extracting, right? This is the extracting relationship. They're in it for the money. You know, it's like a predator, and it's such a powerhouse gaming culture. I fell into some of this work, and I'm currently in a project right now that I just started with another director about this very impact and what it's doing to our children. And there's so much evidence. And I feel it is a responsibility, not to add any ageism to this, but as grown-ups, maybe we have a little bit of reflection here to know this external world of how strong that voice can be. But my own son got into gaming very early, not so much through me, but through friends and even through his school. And our schools are using tremendous amount of technology. Maybe some of you know that. And let's reflect on what the research says. Nicholas Kadaris, who wrote a book called Glow Kids, came out just a few years ago. He's one of many who's done tremendous research on this very subject, explaining the addictive powers. And I think if we want to be part of that voice for youth to have that autonomy, for youth to be able to use their own voice and to know what that own voice is, to be able to have the time to do the things that I think many, Richard Louv, believes they are entitled to, and to know about their world around them. You know, it's an important place to put our energy and ask, is this right? And what can we do about it? You can change the slide. Thank you, Emma. Thank you. So with all the technology that there is and the ideas that they actually do something for our youth, this was one or many quotes to be found. The global report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development suggests education systems that have invested heavily in computers have seen no noticeable improvement in the results for reading, math, science, program for international student assessment tests. So I live in Northern California, just right north of San Francisco, and not far from Silicon Valley. And what's such an interesting, I guess irony would be the right word, is how many of the those in the tech industry have their children in schools that are nature-based or Waldorf-based, uses a lot of arts, a lot of nature, as well as part of its pedagogy. And there are a lot of articles about that. Find them, but I see it. I see it. I actually worked in a Waldorf school for a while, and our parents, most of them were in technology. And here they had their children in a school that actually does not support any technology, but brings it back to the arts, into really good storytelling, and to nature. And I think that's, as educators, parents, that's something to think about and to ask, are there models that we can advocate more or programs within our schools to emphasize that more? Is there another slide there, Cara? Oh yeah, okay, yeah. One solution, and I wanted to bring up Tristan Harris's name. He's what's called an American technology ethicist and founder of what's called the Center for Humane Technology. He was behind a film called The Social Dilemma, which came out, I think it was 2019. It's been a few years, but it's still a good film. And he writes, technology is causing a set of seemingly disconnected things, shortening of attention spans, polarization, outrageification of culture, narcissism, and addiction to technology. So how do we approach this problem? Because I think, the research is there. And how do we counter that in a way? I mean, we're on technology, we understand the value of it, but with our youth, without oppressing them, but remembering also these other factors that are being forgotten in their lives or could be more embraced. And that again is nature and the arts. Arts education has taken over the years a real plummet. And yet you see how the arts, like in our, and I'm going to talk about generations now, like maybe our grandparents. I'll talk about my grandparents just as an example, but that was a generation where textile arts, you made your own blankets, weaving, crocheting, knitting, all these, or sewing. These were just basic life skills that enriched your life that a lot of our own youth don't do. And that's a connector. That's a connector for intergenerations. I did a project with a group of homeschoolers, brought in some elderly women from our community, and the young, the youth were about 10 years old. We spent an afternoon, it was every week, knitting or sewing or some sort of textile art. And it wasn't so much about the textile art, the baby booties somebody was making or the scarf somebody was making, which was all nice conversation, but the magic was the connection. Because while we were there and took the time to slow down, the older women who had phenomenal life stories shared their stories in a very powerful way, just casually, organically. And the young people listened. And it was reciprocal too. The older people really listened to the children. They were interested. What are you guys doing? What are you interested in? And it was such a respectful approach. And it was so simple, and it was quiet. And in that conversation, the youth were learning about World War II stories, where some of the women had been living in London during World War II, telling stories you would never find in a textbook. Another woman, grew up in the countryside in Kentucky, and told us about mountain life, all these interesting stories that had us all engaged, and it's something I would love to see more in our communities. And for some reason, I think it's taboo. And I think that's something that hurts our youth. It actually hurts both sides. It's another equilibrium that brings people together. Maybe I'll pause because I know I'm sure some folks, I don't want to take up all the time, but I would love to hear if you had any thoughts about the arts or stories, maybe nature in connection, how that's worked, or maybe how it's not worked, or ways that you might be able to bring it into, what it is that you're doing. And see, and Farah, if you could help me, I'm having a hard time seeing. Oh, there we go. And feel free to unmute yourself. Or even how maybe technology has played in the role of being an external factor where it's been hard to have your own voice either heard or shared in that way. So if I can this feels like such a larger systemic issue to me, the balance of evolving tech and how we manage that in education and parenting is a question that I think of frequently, but I don't have the answer to. It does feel overwhelming. I totally get that. So I'll read these out loud. Thank you. My training is in Native American Studies, and I have so enjoyed learning about Indigenous pedagogies that combine education and nature and intergenerational connection. I reflect on your comment because it does seem like right now we're in this moment of time where things are shifting a lot. And I think that's such great opportunity. And we've kind of gone through this polarization of, heavy technology, which has been kind of an explore, I think, for all of us. But is it an opportunity to come back to a lot of, let's say, indigenous wisdom? And I say that as an Irish person, Irish American, because I've come back to my own Irish indigenous culture, which is, and we all have some sort of indigenous culture. We go way back, but bringing back those arts of expression that are part of our generations. And I'm seeing this a lot in the Irish American community. I'm also seeing programs that are opening up. There was one that I worked with in Marin called Builda, which is a nature program for youth, but it has expanded into adult learning as well. And so what's happening is a lot of parents are coming with their children to learn about stinging nettles. And yes, you can harvest these and make soup that night. And how fun is that? Or, different medicines that are part of our traditions, or for teas. I mean, it sounds so simple, but when you live that, it enriches so much. Yeah, thank you, Maura. And I think that going back to feeling it's so systemic. Yeah, I think we feel that, but that Spanish teacher who had the guts, it took a lot of guts taking 13 teenagers on a bus all the way to northern Mexico back, years ago. I'm not sure if that's even legal anymore, but it you can impact people greatly by steering them in directions, or the child has an interest and that's like, oh, I heard about this program. One thing about being older is that we may have ideas about direction, right? And it's not that you should do this, but it's about, oh, well, have you heard about this? And that's really interesting that you're saying this. And rather than, I think you should do that. I don't know, maybe you don't see a difference. I feel a difference. I'm a very sensitive person when people talk to me. I like my autonomy and not tell what people tell me to do. Maybe you're the same way. I don't know. But I know our youth often feel that way, shut down, and we don't want that. My father was a computer teacher in the 60s and 70s and took kids on trips in the summers and on breaks. I think education like this is so important. Yeah. Laughing and joy is so critical, and having humor too. And I feel I'm down here a little bit to find that, because I'm not finding it so much home right now. And I think that's a connector that we have just as humans. Any questions or any other comments that you might have?
Yes, I was just reflecting myself as well. And my sister, how she raises her kids. Sorry, I'm bringing up my nephews. She is adamant of like almost no electronics, maybe 30 minutes to an hour a day at home. But because they get so much of it at school that she has no control over. And so at home, she really takes the reins and there's no TV, they can listen to the radio, they can, play with their toys all they want, color, homework, all that. And my sister has instilled a big trust in me, with letting me take them for 2 weeks in the summer. And whenever she goes out of town or whenever she needs a babysitter, because I respect her decisions. And a lot of, or even our relatives will give them the phone because they ask for it because mom's not around, or the laptop. And with with me, she knows that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to respect her wishes, and we'll do educational trips to the planetarium. We'll go to Mount Lemon. We'll go on nature walks. And I give them that time to just look at everything. And if we have to read the little plaque that tells us what this tree is or how old this tree is, and we sit there for 15 minutes and read how old the tree is. And I feel very grateful to be able to do that with them, because I know I've seen it come from when we go to the planetarium and learn these things, and then going to breakfast the next day, and we went to IHOP and they had the little coloring, and they drew me little black holes that we learned about. They would have been able to do that if we just sat at home or went to watching TV, if that makes sense. I just feel really grateful for the space to be able to do that.
Oh, you're a wonderful auntie. Very lucky. It's nice. Anybody else?
I was just gonna offer, there's a person who works with kids that have a lot of either neurodiversity or just some other differences in the way that they work and learn and behave. His name is Dr. Ross Green. He has a model called Collaborative and Proactive Solutions. And it really draws together, I think, what we were talking about earlier with working with kids and working collaboratively to empower young people. We've been using his model with my son and going through that process with him and thinking about the way that technology is used in our house and the way, because he wants to play Minecraft and Roblox and he wants to do these things that his friends do, and we don't want to shut him down. We don't want to shut down his interests, which are his interest right now, his special interest is Minecraft and only Minecraft. And so, but we're working through this method with him to help him to decide together how much technology use is appropriate and how much is beneficial to him and how much is not beneficial to him. So I just wanted to offer that as like a way to kind of draw together both of the things we talked about today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ashley. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And then Jen, I see you have your hand raised, and then we have a few more slides to get through after this last comment.
I'll be quick. One of the things that I've been thinking through these conversations is like the privilege too of parents not being able to use technology to support them. And so when I said earlier in the chat that this feels like such a larger systemic issue to me, I actually had a conversation with one of my coworkers today, and she was saying that she felt like she was a bad mom because she is a single mom with no support from the co-parent, like none whatsoever. And she's working full time raising this child by herself. This little girl, I think, is in kindergarten. And she kept on saying to me in the conversation, like, I just wish that I didn't use the tablet so much with her. Like, I should be reading to her more. And this is something that I struggled with as an early mother as well, because I am chronically ill and I have multiple disabilities and I'm a full-time working single mom as well. So I think about like just all of the privilege and not being able to use this technology, even in school systems, right? In Arizona, our education system is so deprioritized that I think that if teachers get access to technology and they can use this technology to interest children and keep children that are in really impoverished situations interested in science, technology, arts, math, etc., that it can actually be a really great benefit to not only the children themselves, but the education system that those teachers are working within. And I think it was Danielle that said later in the chat, how is this technology helping you? And I think it's so important that we just remember the privilege of not being able to have these programs with tech involved or like not being able to use tech as parents in a much larger systemic issue of deprioritizing education and funding.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'll read Benedict.
I have to just to add my thoughts on this. The technology aspect is good, but like I said in my notes on the chat there, it's already causing problems for kids. So teachers as well as parents need to try to caution, the time children expose themselves to the screen, as it's already causing eye problems as well as posture problems for children. I'm suggesting, the use of the field trip that was mentioned before under nature. Field trip is so impactful and is very good for allowing kids to be free, to relate to nature, to relate to themselves, to be independent and come up with innovations, as well as project methodologies for children in schools. These are my thoughts and the kinds of free relationships with other peers as well as their teachers is very common in these approaches. So I am very supportive of your earlier discussion on nature. That is actually a great one, and I support it wholeheartedly. Actually, my master's work was on field trips for children. They learn a lot academically, cognitively, even their attitudes change when they go on field trips. They learn so much, so much, so much. So we should adopt such approaches for children, both the teacher relationship with their students, with peers, children, students to students, students with community, students with adults, students with the community people. They learn a lot when they go out. You don't have to tell them go this way or go that way. They learn a lot because they are in a free environment and they see things that you, the teacher, don't even see. So when at the end of a field trip, you ask them to put down on paper their experiences, you will read a lot. You will learn a lot. I really support.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to share my screen again. We'll briefly touch on one more thing, and then we're going to move to an evaluation survey. So we'll just briefly, Emma, if you want to very quickly kind of go over the role of book clubs and what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I just wanted to, provide another resource that's available to people to sort of think about these ways of building youth autonomy and fostering intergenerational community in addition to what Barbara mentioned and what so many people talked about. And, the discussion was so insightful. I just appreciate what everyone said, thinking about technology and thinking about nature education and field trips. But with that, I will just quickly move us into another, form of fostering intergenerational community, which is through book clubs that can, foster shared interests, promote mutual learning, facilitate meaningful conversations, build relationships, and break down social barriers. They can also play a really significant role in addressing issues created by book bans, which do so much to censor young people and are really just like the antithesis of youth autonomy. So they provide a counterforce to censorship by creating spaces where young people can challenge the status quo and share ideas and experiences and perspectives together. And some of the ways that book bans can counteract, or some of the ways that book clubs, excuse me, can counteract book bans is by creating safe spaces for exploration and dialogue, fostering critical thinking and resistance, fostering empathy, diversity, and inclusion, promoting autonomy and ownership over learning, and supporting resistance to censorship. And here are just a couple of orgs that do work to either combat book bans or talk about creating book clubs. So we have PEN America, the American Library Association, Project Censored, the ACLU, FIRE, which is Freedom for Individual Rights and Expression, Banned Books Week, and Amnesty International. And you'll see that some of these orgs brand themselves as civil rights orgs, some of them are as like free speech orgs, and some of them as human rights orgs. And I think that just goes to show how fundamental civil rights and, the protection of democracy is to human rights. And, I could talk about that way more than we have time for, but I'll just leave it at the, youth autonomy and human rights are so much at the center of these issues with book bans and as a result, or as a, counteract book clubs.
Thank you so much, Emma and Barbara and everyone for coming today. As we're wrapping up, here is a survey for evaluation. We really appreciate hearing your thoughts on the session, and it helps us to really improve the sessions going forward and be able to put more of these on in the future. So please fill this out. I will also put this in the chat in a minute. You will also see I'll put some additional links to some more resources in the chat in a moment as well. And shortly, it might take a few days or a week or so, but a recording of this session, these slides, and whatever resources would shared will be available on our website on the TAAS page, and you will likely get an email that has that information as well. So share that now. Thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you.
There's the links, and I just realized I only sent the survey one to Emma, so I will be sending that out to everyone now. But yes, thank you all for coming, and I really hope you all have a great rest of your night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Kara and Emma, so much for what you pulled together
Thank
tonight.
you.